This patch is absolutely nuts. It's been a little bit since we've had an OTA in Marvel Snap, and I think the devs knew they needed to knock this one out of the park because this one is a barn burner. Let's start with what is likely to be the single most impactful change of the patch, and perhaps the most impactful change since the Blob nerf, and maybe even before, and that is a nerf to Lockjaw. Moving Lockjaw from 3 energy to 4 energy really impacts how much value you can get off of him. This is effectively a 33% reduction in the average use case of Lockjaw. Now, I do still expect to see Lockjaw in both Thanos and Hela because its value is just too high, but it's now sort of effectively capped. You are now no longer able to go Lockjaw on 4, Lockjaw on 5, Lockjaw on 6, unless you are playing a zero-cost card, or you are discounting Lockjaw in some way, or you are, of course, using the Time Stone. Now, this is a significant nerf to two of the best decks in the entire game, Thanos and Hela. Of the two, I think Thanos is more affected. Thanos is more reliant on Lockjaw as a method of energy cheating and of converting its stones into dangerous cards. In addition, Lockjaw on turn 4, well, that's often the turn you're trying to Time Stone into a 5-drop on. It does take you a little bit off course. You still have these draws that involve, like, maybe you Time Stone into Lockjaw plus stone on 4, Cull Obsidian plus stone on 5. That is still pretty good, and I do expect Thanos to be around, but this should give people more incentive to try non-Lockjaw stuff in Thanos. Or it would if Lockjaw wasn't a 4-5. 4-5 is an actually decent stat line for a card that can convert your units into other units like this, and I think that means that I will be playing it in Thanos going forward. I just won't be expecting it to do all the heavy lifting the way that it does now, and it likely does change the way in which you have to approach snapping with this deck, and it could also place a higher premium on the builds of Thanos that are playing Corvus Glaive as a ramp option if Lockjaw ends up falling off a little bit. The Corvus Glaive Hela stuff has been successful in Thanos, and while obviously losing Lockjaw would be an issue, it does seem like a solid backup, beefy 3-drop, Corvus Glaive, Wave, things of that nature, that can allow you to cheat things out and play the deck the way you want to play it when you're not Lockjawing people. I'm interested to explore both Thanos decks in that mold and Thanos decks in a sort of zoo-type mold that are no longer have to be Lockjaw decks just because the card is too easy to run in Thanos. I think this is the main thing that strikes me about this Lockjaw nerf, is it is now no longer just sort of the obvious way to build Thanos or the only real way to build Thanos, because the effect it had previously was you would put it in the Thanos deck because why would you ever not? And that means that doing anything else in the Thanos list is a little bit awkward. As for Hela, I think Hela will survive this roughly intact. Now, Hela Lockjaw is used for a different purpose than Thanos Lockjaw. Hela is really looking to use it to dig into the deck, and you can still do that with this card. You could still go, Lockjaw on 4, Jubilee on 5, things like that. I think Hela is more able to accept this because most of the power Hela actually puts on the board comes from the discards anyway, so I think Hela can deal with it perhaps a little bit better. That's my first impression. Obviously, we'll have to see if that actually gets borne out, but my thought process is basically Thanos probably still runs this. I don't actually know how much this negatively impacts Hela. What might negatively impact Hela is all the metagame movement around this that can happen, because Hela is sort of predicated on these matchups into these, Saratech, Darkhawk, just decks that don't really go tall enough, rely on tech in order to disrupt your opponent, and Hela just sort of crushes them into the dirt. And after a metagame change like this, who knows what's going to end up on top? It's possible that Hela ends up with some unfavorable matchups. That said, Thanos was certainly one of those potential unfavorables, and it also ate this Lockjaw nerf, so it's possible that this could be a thing that puts Hela in a good position. Generally speaking, I think Hela can survive this because it's less reliant on actually putting points on the board on every turn except the one where it plays Hela, so you can afford to do these little awkward sacrifices, make plays that other decks really can't because you make it up with your big Hela haymaker. A buff to perhaps the absolute worst card in the game. I have it straight from Glenn Jones that there were weeks where Adam Warlock had a lower win rate than Agatha Harkness, which is just absolutely horrifying to contemplate. Like, that is a horrifying stat for any card to have, let alone a card that is so hard to actually profitably change into something that actually makes sense. This version of Adam Warlock as a 5/4 is effectively a method for trying to draw one card going into turn 6. That's not necessarily the worst thing you can do, but I do think likely its points are a bit low for what it needs to be if it is actually going to be an effective method of card draw. Decks that I think might be able to take advantage of it include Magic decks. It's just the issue is like, okay, you put it in Sheena, you play the Magic, and then, oh no, you did that instead of a Leech, you get your stuff blown up, or like, oh no, you don't actually get the extra draw out of Adam because you're not playing anything on turn 5. They are. But a deck that might actually benefit from this as a Magic deck is potentially Living Tribunal. That is the kind of card that it could actually get away with. The issue is it's very hard for Living Tribunal to take priority in a way that doesn't end up blowing up its future potential for winning the game. So I don't really see where Adam Warlock is going to go here, but I'm just glad he's on their radar because I thought he was bad, but worse win rate than Agatha is like an appalling thing to hear about any card existing in the entire game. That is unreal. Putting this in your deck is worse than putting a card that randomly plays cards in your deck. That is absolutely horrifying. So I'm just glad he's getting a little bit of attention, even though I do not expect this to be a big metagame changer. I have a lot to say about this one. Darkhawk eating a nerf because of the sins of Zabu. I think that's an undeniable way to describe what's happening here. I am personally of the opinion that this is not a deserved nerf. I personally think that the issue here is Zabu. However, I also think that they kind of know that. They mentioned in the patch notes that, like, okay, look, we get that, like, some of this is Zabu, but all right, we need to at least experiment with issues of Darkhawk. For me personally, at the highest levels of Infinite, Darkhawk was honestly on the way down anyway. There are a lot of decks that would be playing Darkhawk that just kind of aren't right now because of Cull Obsidian, because of Sentry and Nihilist, because of Miss Marvel. There are a lot of competing 4-drops, and the real issue with the Darkhawk package is not actually Darkhawk, it's that all the decks that want to play him are Zabu decks, and you need to be playing a 3-drop Rock Slide, maybe a 3-drop Black Widow, in order to justify the Darkhawk, which takes away some of the competitive advantage of being a Zabu deck, which is you don't have to play 3-drops because 3-drops suck. One of the main things that makes Zabu decks good is that you don't have to play these 3/3 mopey garbage cards. You get to play Iron Lad instead. You get to play really good stuff. And the fact that the Darkhawk iterations of Zabu are forced to give that up means that they have fallen out of favor for both myself and for a wide range of high Infinite players. This is not a card that a lot of people had a lot of respect for. It is fine, but it is far from the best target for a Zabu deck to run right now. However, I am willing to believe that lower down the ladder, this is something that makes a lot more sense. I am willing to buy the idea that that is a specific development that is very specific to high Infinite, that this kind of competitive advantage matters a lot more when players are really going to take advantage of it, and that far down the ladder, this is actually just, you know, a stomper. This is a guy that'll beat you down. First of all, in the comments, let me know what your opinion on Darkhawk is. I am interested to hear it. Qualify it with your rank so I can see if I have like any understanding of how the correlation is going. I tend to think that the higher ranked you are, the worse you'll think this card is, and I kind of want to know if my comments bear that out. As far as this nerf, I mean, yeah, it is, in my opinion, undeserved, but it's not like the worst thing that's ever happened because, again, Darkhawk was on the way out in a lot of my decks, and at least this gives him something to do. I'm not sure what this gives him to do, but I'm glad at least that they didn't make him, you know, like actual Devil Dinosaur stat line. I tend to think that the right stat line for this guy ends up being something far closer to like 5/6 and then getting the plus. But I also think that, like, if you do that, all you're doing is like nuking Ronin, who is finally seeing some actual play for the first time. So I get why they wouldn't do it, but I do think that like his effect is a lot harder to actually make happen than either Ronin or Devil Dinosaur at this point. So me personally, I would be giving him the more generous stat line if I could. But I also understand, like, hey, look, Ronin hasn't been able to see play for a while. We don't want to like immediately nuke him out of the game. And also, like, hey, maybe this one actually does make sense. So normally this is going to be a 5/11. If you rock slide, this will be a 5/15. This is actually a very, very, very large dude. This is a big guy. There is an argument for this card being legitimately strong. And I think one of the things that I like about it is that it is most of the time going to be turning on a Scar. So your 5 drops that turn on Scar, there haven't been a lot of those. There really aren't a lot of those in the game. And this is now a new version of a 5 drop that turns on Scar that you can actually try to play. I will probably be trying out like Rock Slide Darkhawk Thanos. I don't really know where it's going to go, but I will probably at least try it out. And I'm interested to see what this deck can do when it's not constrained by being a Zabu deck. Because as a Zabu deck, it has a competitive disadvantage in that you have to play these 3 drops. But as a non-Zabu deck, it might be a little bit more free to experiment and try what else can be good with this card. Overall, undeserved nerf, but I'm not unhappy about it. Forge going back to a 2/2 that gives +2. I mean, like, this guy has been on a journey since last August, and here he is right back at the starting line. I think this is fine. I think that Forge is a key component of a lot of these bounce decks that are running around. I think they will need replacements, and I think that it is entirely possible that he was subsidizing the archetype in a very real way. One card this does raise the importance of course, is Nico Minoru, both in Bounce and in Destroy, where Forge was a key piece of increasing the power either of a variety of cards or of, Deadpool. This is a big buff to Nico in those decks. I think if you are a Destroy gamer, if you are a Bounce gamer, Nico becomes even more important for you to pick up now, and the lack of Forge does sort of add some awkwardness, especially to the Bounce builds. The Destroy builds have cards that can go in there. Their Deadpools once again get smaller, as they did with Hulkbuster, but I think replacing Forge with Hulkbuster in the Destroy decks that were not running Hulkbuster already is a fairly easy thing to do, while in Bounce, there aren't really a lot of good replacements in the current live game. That is a major issue, and I think Second Dinner was thinking of that when they changed the next card. America Chavez is keeping her current ability, giving top card of your deck +2 power and going to a 1/2. Now, my first instinct is, okay, sure, I'll just slot this in the Bounce deck and we'll see how it goes. This is sort of like Forge, except it's not really as predictable, and there are more downsides, but hey, it's got more stats, so maybe it'll just be fine. I mean, a 1/4 that you can bounce for repeated value is genuinely nothing to sneeze at. I think this card might become a legitimate bounce staple. It'll definitely be what I'm doing on day 1 with the new Bounce deck. Like, this is immediately going in the Forge spot because it is the only thing in the game that actually kind of makes sense and fills that role. You can also try to fill it with more disruption, but I think the points that this card provides are actually going to be quite important. I don't think enough people appreciate just how important Forge's points were, and I do think that America Chavez will be a fairly plausible, albeit notably worse replacement. I do expect Bounce decks to still be okay, at least, but I do think that they're going to take, more of a hit from this than you would expect just from a 1-drop. I think Forge is a really important part of those decks, and losing him is quite sad. And if they didn't buff America Chavez, I would think that those decks would be legitimately in trouble. But now I'm thinking they're probably going to stick around. They at least have a 4th good 1-drop that isn't just overloading on disruption and sacrificing points. Sometimes that's the right call. In a metagame like the one we're in right now, Thanos hella everywhere, it is not the right call. You need those points. And so I think America Chavez is going to be quite important. Next up is probably the world's most obvious buff. That is Swordmaster going up to 3/7. Swordmaster is wildly unplayable currently as a 3/6, and going up to 3/7 gives it not just some utility in the context of, like, this is more points that discard can plausibly play while also discarding cards that they're actually happy to discard. Looking at you, Proxima Midnight, who just came out. It also is just like, okay, maybe this is like a 0 card now. You play this with 0, you play this with Cosmo. It's just like what old Maximus was in those decks. It is probably comparable to old Maximus. I can't really decide whether I think drawing your opponent 2 cards or randomly discarding one of your own is a bigger downside, but this is definitely a stat line that Swordmaster deserves to have. And it's good that this, as a serious downside, compared to the targeted discards, which we can see are by far the strongest kinds of discards, non-targeted discards need to have real upside. You look at Corvus Glaive, discard 2, get an extra energy. That's incredibly powerful, and it's only 3/5. So at 3/6, Swordmaster was just totally unplayable. At 3/7, you can give people a reason to actually investigate the card. I don't think this is going to be a major meta player, but if you were someone who liked playing old Maximus, this is actually a card you can put in your decks now, and I think that's a good thing on the whole for the game. Ant-Man getting a buff of 1 power, and I think this is, totally fine. One thing that I will note, though, is I honestly feel kind of sad for Martyr, because Martyr just got moved to a 1/5, and it's like, okay, now that Martyr's a 1/5, the precondition for her, fill up the board, is now the same as it is for Ant-Man, but she's bigger, and now she has an actual role. And now Ant-Man is also a 1/5, and he has the upside of being an ongoing card, and it's like, oh, well, what's Martyr supposed to do again? Like, this is a buff to that 1-drop archetype. It's actually kind of a bit of a stealth buff to Black Swan, where this is now like a legitimate card that people are going to play. Like, a 1/5 is not a joke. This is solid. It's just, it's not the kind of card that moves the needle. It's the kind of card that is part of an accumulation of buffs and meta changes that can make certain decks more viable. I'm not sure if this pushes me towards going to be like, a Thanos ongoing Spectrum deck or anything, but it certainly doesn't hurt. And I'm glad that they're taking a look at these early archetypes, discard, zoo, and even move when you look at like cards like Hercules, where it's like, this is actually just a good thing. I'm glad it's happening. There's not really a downside to it. And as far as I can tell, even in the early game, back in the early pools, like, yeah, maybe there's a chance 3/7 Swordmaster and 5 power Ant-Man are like too strong, but they're also cards literally everyone gets. So what's actually the problem with buffing them? Looking at you, Captain America. Speaking of love for those early pool archetypes, move in the form of Vulture getting a relatively solid buff. I mean, this is now a very, very big guy. Goes from a 3/3/3 to a 3/9 to a 3/15 to a 3/21, as opposed to going from 3/3 to 3/8, 3/13, and 3/18. This is a relatively solid buff, and I'm glad they did it. I think it was long overdue in the sense that once Shang-Chi was no longer hitting 9 up and instead started hitting 10 up, Vulture could very easily go from 8 after 1 proc to 9. And I think that is true of most things that were designed in those early pools to not get hit by Shang-Chi. There are several of them, and notably they did change things like Jessica Jones and Rescue, but poor Vulture got left in the dust and is now finally being updated to the new context in which he exists. That is, of course, Shang-Chi hits 10 plus, so let's make Vulture go to 9 on the first proc and see if that does anything. Now, Vulture is in an awkward spot because the deck he goes in is in an awkward spot. But that said, I know Shuri Enjoyer has been playing Move all the way up to top 20. It is a big, powerful points deck in a metagame where there's not necessarily a lack of interaction, but a sort of preponderance of large number type decks right now. Thanos is a big number deck. Hela is a big number deck. And it actually can go point for point with a lot of those decks. And I think that that is something that will be helped by this buff to Vulture. Is it going to be the biggest deal on Earth? No, but like, there's a guy in top 20 playing Move already. Maybe it's time to take another look at it. All right, y'all, thank you so much for coming on this journey with me through this new patch. Of course, the biggest news is Lockjaw, probably then followed by Darkhawk, but there's honestly some pretty cool stuff even below that in this patch. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on the Lockjaw nerf. I mean, obviously, I'm a big fan of that, but let me know how you think it's going to affect Thanos and Hela. And of course, like we talked about in the Darkhawk section, let me know if you thought Darkhawk was actually the best Zabu target and put your rank after it. I'm really just trying to see something. I promise I won't do any rank shaming. I just want to know if my theory sort of holds up. And, YouTube surveys, notoriously incredibly reliable. Yeah, no, I definitely 100% reliable data that I'm going to be able to base real things on. I'm definitely not just like idly looking to see if you guys agree with me. And then if you do agree with me, taking that to the bank. And then if you don't agree with me, ignoring it forever. Definitely not doing that. Thank you so much for making it this far in the video. As always, I've been KM Best, you've been KM Phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.